25 yıl boyunca akıllı telefon sektörüne öncülük etmiş bir lider. Kendi yarattığı yazılım sistemi ve aplikasyon altyapısı, Nokia, Samsung ve Sony Ericsson gibi markaların tam 500 milyon akıllı telefonunda kullanılan bir teknoloji yaratıcısı. Londra Fütüristler Birliği Başkanı olarak fütürizm ve teknoloji üzerine 200'den fazla konferans düzenlemiş vizyoner bir fütürist. Tüm bu bilgi ve tecrübelerini dünyanın dört bir köşesindeki sayısız şirkete günümüzün akıl almaz hızında değişen teknolojilerinin etkilerini öngörüp işlerini dönüştürebilmeleri için yön veren bir oyun kurucu. Fütürist danışmanlık ve yayıncılık şirketi Delta Wisdom'ın başkanı, Transhumanist Parti UK politik oluşumunun ve H+Pedia projesinin kurucu ortağı. Aynı zamanda da 6 adet çok satan kitabı olan bir yazar. Sevgili konuklarımız, teknolojide 100 en etkili insandan biri olan David Wood'u sürdürülebilir bolluğa giden yolda zorlu tercihler rehberi başlıklı konuşması için alkışlarınızla sahneye davet ediyorum. Dear Mr. Wood, thank you so much for coming all the way from London to our historical Bay of Golden Horn. I cannot help but wonder, what's your insight motivation source that gives you that energy for all that inspiring work?
It's a great pleasure to be in this wonderful city. The reason I do so much, or the reason I try hard to do much, is because I really believe a better future is within our grasp. A much better future than today, enabled by the technologies which are being developed. But I don't think this future is inevitable. I think it's risky. I think it will only be achieved if we understand what needs to be done and work hard and smart. So that's why I'm taking every opportunity to share these messages.
Thank you very much. We are very happy to listening to you.
So I admire the topic set for this conference, being organic in 2040. To me, organic means living in a good relationship with the environment. The phrase I like is sustainable superabundance. Superabundance means more than just the same as today, except more quantity. It means life with new qualities. It means new levels of experience, new levels of consciousness. And the phrase sustainable means that we can live in this better quality of life in a harmonious relationship with the environment. But as I said at the beginning, this is not going to be easy to achieve. The years ahead are going to be years of great difficulty. They're going to be years of lots of change, acceleration, and disappointment and disruption. So let me talk a bit about my own experience of disruption. 30 years ago, my business card didn't say futurist, it said software architect. 30 years ago, I was involved in writing some of the software for some of the world's first successful handheld computers. This was created by a company in London called Cyan, which sold about 1 million copies. And what we did in this company is we realized the future would be different from the present. So we built a new model, a model that was the same but much better in many ways. This device came out at the end of the 1990s. I still carry one with me today, the Cyan Series 5. I'm a pacifist as well as a futurist. But we realized also that the world was going to change more than simply being an increment, a step up from before. We realized our world was going to be disrupted by a new force, the force of the mobile phone industry. So later we drew this picture from 1998 of the future which we envisioned, a future that had two trends, the trends that we knew and loved, the trend of computers becoming smaller and more mobile, and then the new trend of the vast mobile phone industry producing devices that were smaller, but also with more functions and with more applications. We realized our world would be disrupted, and we took the time to think what would it mean, and eventually we decided we needed to change our company DNA, we needed to change our culture, we needed to change our focus, so we built a new company, Symbian, that patiently adapted our earlier software for this forthcoming new world of mobile applications and smartphones. We imagined we might be successful in about 3 years' time. We got investment from the big three companies of the mobile phone industry from these days, Nokia, Ericsson, and Motorola. Maybe some of you are old enough to remember when they ruled the world. They invested in us. We said, maybe in 3 years we will help you to build successful smartphones. It actually took 7 years before we were profitable, but then we became very profitable indeed. And as you heard in the opening introduction, software that my teams wrote were included in 500 million smartphones. And I don't have time to tell that whole story today, but there are some lessons which I think apply increasingly to all industries in the future. Lessons which I will briefly summarize as disruption often goes through a slow and disappointing phase. Nothing much seems to happen despite the hype until then there's a fast and furious phase when everybody gets surprised at how quickly things actually happen. Disruption also is more than building new technology. Technology enables new products, but it's very important to build an ecosystem, a community of companies that assist each other, that build applications and have an application store with feedback cycles for people to benefit from each other's products. I also learned, and this is another general principle, that disruption happens in waves. There was a disruption from the mobile phone industry. Later, there was an even bigger disruption from Silicon Valley with companies like Apple and Google. And there's yet another disruption coming as more artificial intelligence comes to be the most important application. And each new wave often has new ideas, new tools, new people. And sometimes when we're foreseeing the future, we tend just to focus on the next wave, but we should look at the wave beyond that because that's going to be even bigger. And the fourth lesson from this is that in a disruption, the outcomes are by no means inevitable. It depends very much on human actions, human reactions, and human culture. So that's part of what I'm going to take my message from. I'll also refer briefly to some of what I've learned in the last 12 years of chairing an organization called London Futurists, where we've had meetings a bit like this, once a month. There's been more than 200 of them, when we have speakers giving their views as to the radical possibilities ahead. And what I'm going to do in the time that's left to me is to give my highlights, the best understanding of what this future will be. And I'll start by looking not at the future of London, but at the past of London. I'm a bit nervous talking about history here in this city of Istanbul, where the history is even more magnificent and amazing than the history of London. But there is something very interesting that we have in England. We have a detailed record for 750 years, since 1270, of the average wealth of the average person over that time, adjusted for inflation. What do you think that looks like? Do you think that the average wealth was cyclical, up and down? Do you think it was a straight line? What kind of curve do you think these data shows? A kind of exponential curve. Well, not much changed for most histories. And then it started changing a bit, and then it started changing faster and faster. Now, that's just one country. There isn't the same depth of records for the whole world, but there are researchers, such as the American Luke Mulhauser, who has tried to do something similar for the whole world, looking at the average income for the whole world. He goes back to 1000 BC. His curve is even more dramatic. Nothing much changed in terms of the average wealth, the average purchasing power until about 1800, and then it went rocketing up. Some people say, oh, that's just the wealthy people. But actually, if you look at how many people are living in extreme poverty, there's still too many, but that figure's been going down, even as the overall population has been going up and up. And if you plot as a fraction of the population not living in extreme poverty, it looks much the same. For most of history, most people lived in extreme poverty. Now, there's much, much fewer as a percent. That same jump. And look, Mulhauser has other curves like this. The average life expectancy at birth, how long would you expect to live? For most of history, you were lucky to reach the age of 30. Most families had most children dying at young age. And then from about 1800 onwards, the average life expectancy has gone up and up. And now, the average life expectancy for a baby born anywhere in the world is more than 70. And you can look at the average amount of energy each person uses, or even the average war-making capacity that's on the planet. You may have noticed some similarities between these curves. If we put them all in one curve, they've all got the same shape. And what's really interesting is, what's the cause of this jump up? Was it a change in the weather? Was it that a particular war ended with a particular result? When historians look at it, they tend to agree the cause of this jump up was the Industrial Revolution, when people learned how to make better tools that were driven by steam that allowed even better tools to be created. As in the words of the MIT professor Andrew McAfee, history teaches us that nothing changes the world like technology. For thousands of years, as we've seen, until the middle of the 18th century, most of the main metrics, population, economic expansion, and social development, hardly changed. It was only when the steam engine was improved to the extent that the Industrial Revolution took place that most of these metrics started going up and up and up. And although when we look at history, we like to look at kings and queens and wars, in reality, what has had the biggest effect has been practical inventions. And it's my view that more practical inventions will take us into sustainable superabundance ahead. But you may be wondering, that's economics. What about genuine measures of well-being? Well, here I want to look at two measures of well-being, both of which actually are reported in the book by Steven Pinker, Enlightenment Now. I'll talk about the one in black first, then I'll talk about the one drawn in dark grey. The one in black shows, from 1870 onwards, the work of a Spanish researcher who looked at life expectancy, also height, as an indication of how healthy people were, looked at how much access people had to knowledge, looked at how many people were literate, looked at the state of schools, and yes, the average wealth measured in terms of purchasing power. And despite wars, which have taken place over that time, the overall index has gone up and up. Another researcher in Holland has looked more widely, and his data includes the quality of the environment, how much pollution there is, the biodiversity, measures of inequality, measures of the civic engagement, how many people are taking part in politics, even questions like personal security. And his data, as you can see, also tends to go up and up. So to summarize, history so far, at least in the last 200 years, despite many bad things happening, seems to be a history of broadly increasing human flourishing, enabled by improvements in technology, which on the whole have led to the world being better. We're here today, of course, not to look at the past. We're here to look at what might happen by 2040. And I want to offer 3 scenarios for what might happen in this period. And the simplest prediction is that history will continue more or less the same. This is the business as usual assumption. And people argue over whether there might be a bit faster improvements or maybe some things will slow down. I have to say, it's my judgment that this is unlikely. Any of these scenarios are unlikely. I think it's only about 10% likely that by 2040 we'll be in broadly the same kind of world as today, except a bit better. The difference is the Industrial Revolution is becoming even more powerful. I'll talk about the 4th Industrial Revolution shortly. But basically, it has the potential to knock us downwards and backwards into an environmental catastrophe with global warming, with the other damage we're doing to parts of the environment. It has the potential to bring about a social collapse with increasing inequality and with some people doing incredibly well, but most people feeling left behind. It has the potential to be a humanitarian disaster. And I rate that probability about 30%, which is far too high for me to relax, which is my reason for doing what I try to do to raise greater awareness of the future possibilities. Now, if you're good at mathematics, you may realize there's a 60% probability of something else. It depends on how we're going to adapt to the increasing potential that technology gives us. Will it be increasing potential for damage, or will it be increasing potential to boost human well-being into what I have called this sustainable abundance for all, which I reckon has about a 60% chance of happening, because we humans, on the whole, we are well-intentioned and capable and thoughtful and conscientious. But there's too much probability that things will go badly. So my task is to figure out ways to increase the probability of having that wonderful future and to diminish the possibility of that terrible future. And in part, it's about painting a clearer picture of this positive vision of a techno-progressive transformation. It's also about rediverting the energies which are being put into unproductive and dangerous trends today. If we can recognize why people are doing these destructive things and redirect them onto more positive. I'll say a bit more about the Industrial Revolution now. It grew out of a background of science and an open society in which people were allowed to criticize authorities and come up with new ideas. Technological change happened in a series of waves. The first wave was with steam and mechanization. The second wave was with electricity, gradually taking over from steam. It was the invention of synthetic chemicals, artificial fertilizers. It was mass production, which changed the world even more than the first Industrial Revolution. Then there was the third Industrial Revolution, in which computers gradually started entering the workplace. This can be measured from 1959, which is the year Moore's Law started. The first year there was an integrated circuit with one silicon transistor on it. And it has involved huge disruption around the world. And the fourth Industrial Revolution is just getting going. I call it the NBIC convergence. and I'll explain more about that in a minute. Each of the industrial revolutions has had a bigger impact than the previous one. Each of them has been more global. And you might notice something else. You might notice an acceleration in the timescales. There was something like 120 years between the first two in terms of their start dates. Only 2/3 of that, 80 years to the start of the next wave, and about 2/3 of that again to the start of the next wave. And let's look at the causes of this acceleration. It's positive feedback cycles. A positive feedback is what you sometimes get when a microphone is too close to a speaker and it gets louder and louder in a terrible way. Well, we can have good positive feedback. The machines were built with simple tools to start off with, but as more steam power was applied to machinery, they could build better tools, which could build better machines, which could build yet better tools, and so on. In the second industrial revolution, we had electrical tools and electrical machinery. And we also had synthetic chemicals, which could be involved in building better synthetic chemicals. In the third industrial revolution, initially the computers were very difficult to build and design. Some of the first were assembled by hand, by hammer and nail. They were designed on paper with pencil. But increasingly, there is the discipline of computer-aided design, computer-aided manufacturer, so you can use one generation of computers to help you design better ones. So computers have got better and better, faster and faster. It's the same with software. Don't laugh, software actually has got better, despite the fact there are still some bugs and problems in it. Smaller teams are able to do much more powerful software. Why? Because they can use software tools like debuggers and compilers and optimizers and profilers and so on to build better software. And now in the fourth industrial revolution, we're having better AI built, not just by humans, we're having AI built by humans using AI tools. So we're seeing faster improvements in AI. Let me give you 3 examples. Example 1. AI algorithms are starting to teach AI algorithms. Now, the picture's a bit misleading. It's not that robots are talking to each other. That's easy. Of course, when one robot learns something, when other robots can learn very quickly the same improvements. What's actually in this story is that if you as a human want to learn about AI, you no longer need to find a human to teach you. You can learn a lot by going online, finding an automatic course. And of course, as we heard in the speech this morning from the president of this university, of course, there's still a role for humans to act as a guide, but increasingly more people can learn AI more quickly. Second example. I'll take a moment to explain this. This is software created by a team in Google, in DeepMind in London, that could lip read. Can you imagine what this woman is saying just by looking at her lips? It's hard. And when you bear in mind that this comes from a library of BBC programs of news and current affairs, which has 17,000 words in it, if you're just guessing, you're only going to get once right every 17,000 times. Human lip readers, without any other help, only get about 1 in 8 words right. But this software was able to get 1 in 2 of the words right, and even when it was wrong, it was something like often the difference between a singular and a plural. So this software was trained by looking at lots of film of people speaking and knowing what the words were that they were saying. So here it goes, interpreting the words of this British politician. But this only happened because another AI had first of all looked at the films and fixed them. Because many films, as you may know, the audio and the video are slightly out of sync. And if they're only maybe a 0.1 of a second or 0.2 of a second out of sync, we humans don't mind much, but you couldn't possibly train lip reading with that. So it turned out that one AI studied all the existing data and cleaned it before the second AI was able to make improvements. And this is how much of the progress is now happening in AI. One AI generates or cleans data, which another one can learn from. And the third example, this is from another team in Google, the Google Brain team, led in America by Jeff Dean. His team wrote software that would set up deep learning architectures. Now, I don't have time to talk about all the issues with deep learning, but when you're designing it, you need to figure out how many layers of neurons, what kinds of layers they are, whether they're convolutional or long-term, short-term memory models, and so on. There's lots of hard choices, which the humans are usually involved with. But he managed to get one piece of deep learning software to build architectures to solve other problems. And in some cases, what the AI came up with was more powerful and more efficient than the best system that the human researchers could design. So AI is writing better AI in some cases than the humans could do. Positive feedback. The biggest positive feedback cycle looks like this. The world today has many more people than before. Some people say this is bad news because we humans have mouths and we eat. Other people say this is good news because we humans have got mouths and we speak and we've got brains and we think. And it's true. People are educated to higher levels than ever before. And we are networked together better than before. Therefore, new ideas can come about. They can be tested on the network. And then they can turn into new tools, new technology. And the technology builds even better networks. The technology improves online education. It improves MOOCs, massive online open courses. And so you get positive feedback, which is why there are more people doing science at a good level than ever before. More engineers working in good levels than ever before. More people who understand the entrepreneurial skills of taking a technological concept and turning it into a product that is impactful in the marketplace. There are more people with design skills. There are more educators. So we are producing more artificial intelligence and deep learning than ever before, which explains why there is the acceleration of technology and likely the acceleration of disruption. So the disruption we've experienced in the last 20 or 30 years is likely nothing compared to the disruption which is likely in the next 20 years. Let's revisit this diagram. Lots of technological change ahead, coming out of science and open society. Although, by the way, if we stop respecting science and if we don't have an open society, it's going to slow down. But assuming there's enough respect for science, the positive feedback cycles that I've mentioned are driving this change. But technology doesn't determine the outcome. The outcome is determined by human responses to technology. What legislation do we put in place to encourage some technologies and forbid others? What subsidies do governments provide to accelerate some technologies and slow down others? What skills do we humans learn to make us comfortable and productive with new technologies? What services are available? And more generally, what values do we apply? Because some technologies make us feel yuck, ooh, horrible. Other technologies make us feel wow, wonderful. And sometimes these values are maybe misplaced. The two problems with this marriage of technology and human response are, first of all, if the human systems are based on previous eras of technology. We've lived in an industrial era, so many of our social structures are based in industrial processes. Now we're moving post-industrial in many ways. Many of our structures in society are no longer suited. The second problem is if the human responses, the responses by politicians and other cultural leaders, are based on a naive view of technology. And both these problems are magnified the faster technology changes. And this is the key issue for our time. People are aware that technology brings many possibilities, but we often have a naive understanding, thanks partly to Hollywood, thanks partly to people selling hype, promising things which aren't possible, and there's lots of that, sadly. So people have a naive understanding of what's really possible, and often our response to it is based too much in the past. So what I'm going to try and do in the time that's left is to try and show you more clearly what is that technological possibility of the fourth industrial revolution, the NBIC, and then discuss what is the right human response. Any ideas what I mean by NBIC? Yes? So there are abbreviations for kinds of technology.
Words, right?
Yes?
I guess C maybe the connection.
Connectivity, perhaps. Community. Biotech, B for biotech, yes. I for infotech, which means not just computing. Computing is the third industrial revolution. It means taking, yes, and N for nanotechnology, just going ahead. So infotech means looking at large sets of data and making sense of it with machine learning and going much faster than before. N is manipulating atoms, nanotech. We've been able to manipulate atoms, of course, from chemistry, but we have much more power over it than before. We are creating smaller computers. We can call them nanobots. Not yet, but in the next 20 years, for sure. We have new kinds of computers, like quantum computers. We have new sensors. B is biotech. It's when we are editing, not our silicon, but we are editing, as we heard in one of the previous talks, our genes. We are understanding our genes more than before, and we are able to alter our genes. And the second industrial revolution brought us synthetic chemicals. This fourth industrial revolution is bringing us synthetic biology. Not just the life forms which we find in nature, but we can create new life forms if we think that's a good idea. And C is for cognotech. It's understanding what's happening in the brain, and it's allowing us, if we want, to restructure the relations with our own neurons. It allows us not just to edit our nature, it allows us to edit human nature, if we want. And there are four quadrants here. The top is roughly hardware, the bottom roughly is software, the left is physics, the right is biology. But we shouldn't think of them as four separate revolutions because they're all connected. The better nanotechnology we've got, we can have better sensors. We can understand what's happening in people's brains without cutting their brains open. We can have scanners. So when people are being intuitive or meditating or being creative or doing incredible feats of learning, we can understand that more easily. Then we can copy it from cognotech into infotech. We can copy some of these learnings into the next generation of artificial intelligence. And that explains, by the way, why many of the world's leading AI companies have lots of PhD researchers from neuroscience. And when we have better AI, then we can do better biotech. If we look one level down, here is my view of the 25 things, the 25 ways the world's going to change in the next 20 years. Molecular manufacturing, next generation green energy, quantum computers, genetic editing, lab-grown clean meat, enhanced pets, the abolition of aging, machine learning, machines that have got emotions as well as intellect, wearable computers, and then new brain-computer interfaces, smart drugs to enhance how we think, even the possibility to suspend our minds in a kind of hibernation, as one of the previous speakers talked about, in consciousness engineering. I said 25 things because, of course, there are many crossover effects, planetary tech, sometimes known. It takes things from several of these fields and joins them together. Geoengineering, outer space technology, drone swarms. Each of these 25 technologies has the ability to turn the world upside down in the next 20 years. But I've left the most important technologies out. The most important ones I mentioned earlier are the ones to do with human values, how society operates, and whether or not these technologies on the outer part of the diagram end up taking us to a sustainable superabundance or instead into a new dark age of humanitarian disaster depends on how society operates. The technologies to direct finance to different areas, the technologies to allow access to information, the technologies that ensure we have market success instead of market failures. And the two most important of all, I've got at the bottom in bold, the technologies to improve education so that people learn the most important things at school rather than the things that might have been important 20 years ago, and the technology to allow a better democracy, a full discussion that takes account of all the insights of the whole population. So these are technologies that will allow human values to flourish rather than being trampled or destroyed by the other technologies. So let me give you my summary of what I think this value should be, this techno-progressive vision of a sustainable superabundance of all, where we should all be prioritizing taking these new technologies. An abundance of clean energy. There's enough energy reaching the earth from the sun in just a few hours to meet all of human needs. But my goodness, we've got to be faster at collecting that and distributing it. We can feed not just 8 billion people as today, we could feed 20 billion people, probably more, by improvements in synthetic biology, improvements that don't rely on living cattle and cows to grow meat, but we can grow meat much more effectively and more healthily in laboratories that take much less space on the earth, use much less water, and have much less impact on greenhouse gases. We can have enough material goods sustainably for everybody with improvements from nanotechnology. We can have enough low-cost healthcare for everybody with new improvements in, we can call it the abolition of aging, in which we tidy the body on a regular basis. It's not just something you put on your face and makes you look younger, but it's something that goes inside the body and undoes the damage of aging. And this will allow many more people to be healthier much more of their time. Intelligence with cognotech, more time for creativity with automation technology that can explore not just outer space, but also inner space, enabled by the social technologies of collaboration and democracy. This is the vision which I think technology allows us to achieve if we prioritize it. There are some things missing from here. I haven't said an abundance of profits. I haven't said an abundance of money. I haven't said an abundance of paid employment. In fact, I share the vision of Arthur C. Clarke, the author of 2001, when he was asked after his film 2001 came out, what he actually hoped would be accomplished by robots and computers like HAL in the movie. The goal of the future is full unemployment. Not full employment, full unemployment. Because the automation and the AIs can be doing all the work, can be growing enough food, can be getting enough energy, and so on. So we can play. Some people think playing sounds childish. We might say, so we can be creative. So we can do all the things we look forward to doing in our retirement. Exploring music, my goodness, there's so much music to explore, there's so much literature to explore. I look forward to exploring my first love, mathematics, going to the moons of Jupiter, getting to know more people. That's the future. So instead of a goal to increase GDP, to boost higher prices and to have greater commercial activity, we should be setting as a goal for society to make it lower and lower cost to have good living for everybody. We should be prioritizing in interventions in the economy so that housing is cheaper and more affordable, so that food is healthier and more affordable, so that education is available to all at the high class level, that we are secure in good health and abundance, as I say, for all. But we're not going to get there automatically. If we leave things going as they are presently going, we risk not an abundance for all. We risk many people being left behind. Let's look at a comparison which shows the direction that we're currently going. It compares two sets of three companies. Three companies in Detroit, so they're very large motor car manufacturers in 1990, compared with the three largest technology companies in Silicon Valley in 2014. The comparison is good because the three companies had roughly the same revenues adjusted for inflation. The ones in Detroit had 1,200,000 people working for them. How many people do you think were working for the three Silicon Valley companies? More? Less? Much less. A tenth as many people were producing the same revenues. And if you look at the market valuation of these companies, the estimation for the longer term potential, the Detroit companies were quite wealthy. They had an estimated value of 36 billion. The companies in Silicon Valley had 30 times the valuation. And that was 6 years ago. Now, of course, they're $1 trillion valuation each, so it's gone even more. So we are seeing the trend of winner takes all. The companies that master the new technology will be able to do so with fewer and fewer people because they're getting their wealth from technology. And more people will be left behind. We're seeing signs of this in lots of statistics. It's sometimes called the great decoupling. The productivity is increasing, but the average wealth is not going up at all. This is for all the G20 countries. Some countries are worse than others. The figures in America show, in particular, many people being left behind. The average income of the average family in real terms has hardly changed since the 1970s. This is bad in all kinds of ways. It's bad in terms of the impact on people getting jobs. This is research again from MIT that shows that as there are more robots added to factories, the whole area has less employment and the wages in all the industries drop. It's bad for employment. It's bad for health. I mentioned at the beginning, average life expectancy is going up and up and up. But in the last few years, it's stopped in some countries. In some countries, the average life expectancy is now going down. America is the worst. This shows you the likelihood of somebody to die in the next year of their life. It looks at people in early middle age, between the age of 45 and 54. And you can see in most countries like France or Germany, Canada, that mortality rate is coming down. They're less likely to die from 1990 to 2015. But in America, the white subpopulation of the USA is going up. More of these people are dying more often. And it's quite stunning to compare the likelihood of somebody in that age group dying in the USA and Sweden. Somebody in the USA is twice as likely to die. What's killing these people? It's deaths of despair. People losing purpose in their life. If you look more closely, it's deaths due to drug addiction. It's deaths due to alcohol dependency. It's deaths due to many more people committing suicide. Many more people commit suicide than are victims of terrorism or even of murder, shockingly. And this is in America. In the last year or two, it seems to be starting in the UK as well. People feeling left behind, people feeling that they are not participating in the abundance which they can see some people having. And what do people do when they are alienated and frustrated? Some people, sadly, kill themselves. Some people, very sadly, kill others too. more people in their despair and anger are attacking others. Here's a sad example of an aeroplane that crashed fast into the middle of a mountain a few years ago. The co-pilot, the young co-pilot, was suicidal. He'd been told he had a disease. He was so angry with life, he decided he's going to go out with a bang. He waited till his captain had left the cockpit. He locked him out. The captain couldn't get back in, and he used the navigation system in the aeroplane to navigate to 100 feet above the ground, deep inside a mountain. Everybody died. And there are many other examples. In Thailand recently, again, there was somebody who went on a shooting rampage. The fear is that as technology becomes more powerful and more accessible, people who are angry and frustrated, either because of health issues or because of some ideological fanaticism, some hatred, will get a hold of weapons and might even destroy the world. The American futurist Eliezer Yudkowsky coined the term Moore's Law of Mad Science. Now, the original Moore's Law says every 18 months, computers get twice as powerful for the same cost. His slightly tongue-in-cheek remark is every 18 points, the IQ necessary to destroy the world drops by 1 point. So today, no matter how angry you are, no matter how mad you are, you probably can't destroy the world. But quite soon, people can get a hold of nuclear weapons or bioengineering. We still don't know whether that coronavirus was humanly engineered. Too early to tell. In the future, some terrorist group might decide to kill the world. The Japanese cult some years ago released gas on the underground trying to kill lots of people. Bioengineering, cyber attacks. We already have governments which plot cyber attacks against each other. Don't need to list them here. Or generally, divisions driven by social media. A very cleverly posted article on Facebook can almost cause two communities to go to war against each other. So if we're not careful, that's what lies ahead. So in my last few minutes, I will summarize what I think we should be prioritizing to take us in that positive direction. I call it a techno-progressive New Deal, which is a bit like the Green New Deal, which says we should prioritize investment in green technology, except I think we should be doing more. These are the projects I am personally committed to working on in the next 12 months. The techno-progressive scorecard is a way of measuring the well-being of society, not the GDP. The GDP is misleading for all kinds of reasons. So a proper scorecard will make it clearer which societies are on the track for overall human flourishing. A new social contract means we are not going to expect most people to work anymore. That made sense in the past. We have the sometimes called the Protestant work ethic in some parts of the world, which said if you don't work, you don't deserve food, except if you're ill or old or young. But that's no longer going to be the case. Most people will not manage to find good paying work, and we should change society to recognize that. We need to improve the way regulation of technologies work. Most people who are regulating technologies, whether it's financial regulation or the regulation of AI, they're not on top of things. It's too difficult for them. We need to move smarter and better people from industry into these roles quickly so that we know which technologies we should be slowing down and which we should be accelerating. And by the way, acceleration often means more public funding of very important work. Funding of preventive medicine, funding of rejuvenation biotechnology, better funding of education, of human values. These will have a tremendous dividend. I don't have time to explain all the other things here. I will finish with some remarks about the fundamentals of this. The fundamentals are that we have the ability, as I said earlier, to change human nature. And some people are horrified by that possibility. Some people say human nature, with all our problems, with our stupidity and randomness, this is precious. we shouldn't be adjusting it at all. Some people say our human nature comes from divine creation. Other people say it's created by evolution, and that process was very long and careful. I say no. I say there are many parts of human nature which are too terrible to keep unchanged in the world today. Part of it's our biological nature that makes us weak. Part of it's our tendency to be stupid individually and stupid collectively because we make shortcuts in our reasoning. Part of it's our selfishness. Part of it's our tribalness, when we like people in our gang and we dislike people outside our group. That made sense millions of years ago in the African savannah. It's not good today. So human nature is a mix of features. Some of these should be preserved, of course. Some of them should be enhanced in the way that traditional education and religions have tried to uplift some aspects of our nature, but some should definitely be limited, or we might say transcended. We must move beyond some of the limits we have inherited from the past. Who should decide? It's not futurists or politicians or philosophers or religious leaders. It should be a collaborative decision with the best of humanity 1.0 figuring out how to get to a humanity 2.0, taking account of the best insights from science, taking account of multiple cultural insights, taking account of the creative imagination of poets, mystics, science fiction writers, critically evaluating it, collective wisdom, so we can figure out how step by step to reach a better humanity and therefore this society of sustainable superabundance. If that was interesting, you can find more about some of these ideas on books I've written at various times about this. The third one there, you can see sustainable superabundance sets out this particular argument in more detail. The others look at some of the areas which I've been a bit quick in covering today. Well, I wish you join together in this futurist task of understanding the possible futures, of alerting people to the dangerous futures that lies ahead, and pointing out how we together can reach this better future. Thank you very much.
We can have soru cevap yapabiliriz. Bir vaktimiz var 10-15 dakika. Eğer soruları olan varsa alabiliriz. For the Q&As.
Talk. Thank you very much for your thoughtful talk. My question is simple, I think. What percentage of educational institutions, be them schools or universities, are on the same page with you, would you say?
Many people in these schools and education realize individually that we need to change how education focuses, but as the institutions are quite resistant to change. The schools, like any other successful institutions, resist change. And so it is possible that it's going to be some new institutions, some new schools that will lead the way. Or it may not be the biggest and most powerful schools in the past that lead the way. There might be some newer, more nimble schools that can take on some of this thinking. In terms of how much of my thinking do they agree with? I don't think anybody agrees with all of it, but at least I think the core principle of these three futures is something most people accept once they see the discussion.
Just thank you for the impressive talk, actually. So you mentioned about, one small add, you mentioned already physics and biology and just two diversity, but I think they're all constructed on the mathematics, which you mentioned that is your love of mathematics. I think it's very critical for the future, is what I want to say. But my question is that if you think that there is one of the social impact will be very in the bad direction, so which is going to be the effect from the subject of this NBCI.
So first of all, a quick comment about biology and physics. The most recent new book on nanotechnology by a professor at Oxford, she's a Spanish professor called Sonia Quintero, she says that in order to make improvements in biology, we need to have better physics.
Yeah.
And it's not just enough to think in terms of the previous dogmas of biology. In terms of the social problems, it is when more people feel they are not gaining wealth that they see others have got. It's when more people find themselves out of work. They imagined in the past that if they work hard, if they get a good education, they'll get a good job. That has been the case in the past, but more people now in America, at least, they're feeling they can no longer adjust. And I think it'll be the same increasingly in other parts. So people will feel left out. At the same time, on social media, they'll see people apparently living like kings and queens. And it's going to make people annoyed and angry. And then if we get bad politics, which in some countries, we've got bad politics now, it makes people even more angry and it causes worse reactions. And often the reaction to bad politics isn't good politics, sadly. It's even worse politics, as we saw in the future. So these things interact in a negative cycle rather than a positive cycle. So it's not one thing that's going to go wrong. It's likely many things will cause other things. What's the problem with the coronavirus? In part, it was bad politics. It was that the initial reports in Wuhan were covered up by local officials who didn't want that open discussion. And then in other countries, Iran, I can mention, that they didn't follow good health practice because they imagined that they somehow their religious tradition would keep them safe. And now, sadly, there are many people in Iran dying. So it's multiple things that cause the problems, which is why we need to make progress in all fields at once, which is why we need lots of people involved. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for coming for us here. My question is actually before question next. You talk about Iran. Mostly you talk about emotional person. Okay, we will understand technology. We will understand biology, but how can I explain that? How we can control this with or without emotional people? How can we dismiss the equation then?
So
what do you think?
I want people to be emotional. Emotions are incredibly good, but I think we need to be careful about some destructive emotions. So we have to find ways to encourage the powerful, positive emotions, compassion, kindness, and generosity, desire for success, but not for selfish success, but for success of everybody. How can emotions be controlled? There have been traditional ways of doing it, of course. If you go to some religious school or practice some meditation or yoga, it can have some effect. But I think there are now new ways to improve our emotional life. There is a whole new field of technology, sometimes called trans tech. It means transformational technology. It's applications that help us to get the results of 20 years of meditation, but perhaps in a much shorter pace of time. And then there is also things that will give us feedback about what's happening in our brains. Many people actually only have a dim awareness of their emotional state. We think we're in control, but actually, if we had a better reports on what's happening inside us, we would do differently. So there's a lot of technologies being developed. And so as we have this technology enhanced, hopefully we will have fewer people making these bad decisions because of inner demons inside of ourselves. There's one here and one at the back.
You shortly stressed about COVID-19 for a while ago. So I just like to ask you about the risk of manipulating the technology in the world. As a person being involved in all these activities and research, how do you see this probability in the future, especially? What is the risk of manipulating technology, not for the sake of humanity, but in opposite direction?
We have lots of risks of people using technology for bad purposes. There is the manipulation of genetics, of course, which might be happening. There are some regulations affecting that. So some researchers some time ago wanted to publish details about how to make the polio virus more deadly, and they were stopped from doing that, thank goodness. So they did not publish that findings. When people discovered new techniques for recombinant DNA, when DNA could be copied from one species to another, most of the scientists gathered together in a place in California called Asilomar. At the Asilomar conferences, they agreed some restrictions. But the worst risks may come from software, from artificial intelligence. We are seeing people using the technologies of social media to destroy good communities. That people who are in the same family and used to have slight disagreements now end up. Some of them are pro-Donald Trump, some of them are anti-Donald Trump, and they can't speak to each other. In Britain, in the same groups, some are now very anti-EU, some of them love the EU. And we no longer have good discussions. We fight bitterly. Why? Because social media has manipulated us. When Mark Zuckerberg made Facebook, he knew that it was going to change people's psychology. But they thought, no harm's going to come. Well, it turns out terrible harm has already come. And once there is even cleverer AI, then I'm fearful what's going to happen. It's going to make us really hate each other even more. So we must understand these scenarios and we must get ahead of them and put the right regulations in place and get the right agreements in place.
Thank you.
First of all, thanks for your speech. My question is about in the graph you have shown that in 100 years the number of the employees has been decreased from millions to 100,000s, and it happens in 100 years. What's going to be happen after 110 years? And it's gonna be same decreasement rate, and it means that like all the people are gonna sit at home. And as a student, the people are our teachers, professors. They're telling that you make a develop yourself. You're learning like some of the languages. You get the certificates, and with that, you're not gonna get the difficulties while you're getting a job. So what's gonna be happen? I mean, after 100 years.
Well, I think the changes are going to happen much faster than that. Actually, in this graph, the difference is just 24 years in this example. I think it's quite likely that by 2040, there will be many fewer paying jobs. And many people who thought they were learning something to give them a job for life will discover that AI and robotics can do it better than them. So there is no single skill you can learn which will guarantee you a job. Instead, what you need is flexibility. The single most important skill is agility, which means you can learn new things quickly. Because whatever you do now, you might get a job for a year or two, or maybe 5 years or 7 years, but then your job will change because AI will be doing lots of your job. So you need to learn agility. You need to learn the emotional competence, the soft skill of being happy with change. And we also need to learn the skill of politics, by the way, to ensure that the state is organized in a way that there's enough for everybody. And so that people who are staying at home, they have plenty to look after themselves. And what will we do? We'll do what people look forward to when they retire. We'll do what the aristocrats do when they didn't have to work. We can really do whatever we want to do. And that's challenging. Some people are afraid of that question.
Individually, if I think myself, you're right. I'm gonna develop myself. But when we look at the humanity for all of the people, and that's disaster, right?
Well, it's only a disaster if you think other people are less capable. And of course, most people in this room are more capable than average. But it's my belief that given the right support, given the right environment, most people are incredible. And they've been living in bad circumstances, which means that sometimes they may be lazy. And if you give them money, they may waste it. But if you give them a good environment, it's my belief they will actually do good things with it. And some of the research into basic income schemes, there have been some basic income schemes, it's been remarkable that people who've received this money have done good things with their lives rather than just being lazy. Now, some people do waste money, but that's because they're already in a bad state. It's not because they are bad humans, they've had a bad environment which has put them in that situation. That's my belief anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech. And I have one last question. Okay, it's about the beginning of your career. Actually, I'm wondering, in the beginning of your career, have you ever imagined smartphones would become what they are today?
That's what we imagined at the beginning in 1998. We imagined they would be quite popular. We imagined that everybody would have a smartphone, but we didn't imagine all the applications. If people asked me then what would people use smartphones for, I've still got some essays which I wrote in about that time. There's a long essay on my website, Delta Wisdom, which I wrote in 2001 about future uses of smartphones. I said they'd used to be used for games and for entertainment and for health and for education. But I didn't imagine people would sit in front of their big TV at home and instead of watching their big TV, they'd spend an hour and a half watching on the small screen. That was inconceivable to me. And so, no, I couldn't foresee the details. And of course, my message from this talk is nobody can foresee the details. There are too many uncertainties. So set the direction. The direction was correct. Of course, the details will change. But I'm broadly happy with what smartphones have done to the world, despite the bad things which they have done too. I think the world is a better place for them, and I think the world will be a better place when more of the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution are adopted fully.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for being with us today.